concerned that they could be the casualties. Coles has announced it will slash the price of some fruit and vegetables by up to 50%. William Churchill from AusVeg says he's concerned it's farmers who will pay for the discounts.
Well, look, there's great concern in the vegetable industry at the moment. These discounts, we're worried that they're not going to be sustainable in the long run, and we're worried about the greater impact this will have on the rest of the industry. Where is the weight of these discounts going to be borne by? Will it be borne by Coles? Are they going to be cutting their transport overheads or some of their fees that they pass on to growers? Or is it the grower who's being expected to shoulder these burdens?
Consumer watchdog Choice is also warning buyers the cost of other goods may go up to pay for those fresh food discounts.
What we know is the heavy reduction of certain particular items in a supermarket work as loss leaders. So you go in buying your milk, you go in buying your apples or your onions, the cheap staples. But the thing is, once you're in there, you're likely to throw a few other items in the trolley. It's rare that we walk away with just that one item. So as to whether that cheap apple or milk is a buffer for potential other prices that are more elevated across the board in the supermarket is something that consumers should check when they look at that docket as they walk out the store.
Chris, will these discounts necessarily hurt the growers?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the growers agreed to this. Coles was very, very clear about how they got an agreement and deals. I really struggle with these debates, to be honest. Cheap food is a good thing. I think definitionally it's a good thing. We spend a lot of time in Australian politics talking about rises in the price of living and how expensive it is to go to the supermarket. Yet every time there's a price cut, suddenly people roll out and say, oh, I don't know if that's really that good a thing. Cheap food is a great thing. Consumers buying things, being able to afford more and being able to put more in their trolley, I think is definitionally good. And I just don't have a lot of toleration for this sort of argument.
And Cassandra, I imagine people would think that cheap fruit and veg is a good thing because it's healthy for people.
Well, except that I'm going to challenge your free market credentials on this because a cartel is not a free market, an oligopoly or a duopoly is not a free market. And the fact is that there are a lot of producers, whether it's wine producers with Dan Murphy's or fruit and veg people with Coles and Woolies, who would rather have a larger number of supermarket chains to deal with, but our planning legislations and our permissions around where and under what circumstances you can build supermarkets means that we've entrenched the duopoly through our planning legislation, and in fact the farmers have fewer parties to deal with than they should have in a real free market.
I think there's absolutely a problem with planning and that sort of thing. So it's not a total free market, but if it was an oligopoly, if it was a quasi-monopoly, then you would see prices going up. We would be soaking, the supermarkets would be soaking customers rather than pushing it down. What the continuous price competition suggests to me is that there is vibrant competition in this sector. Perhaps there could be more, but certainly what we're seeing today is the result of competition in a competitive sector, not a monopolistic one.
Well, let's bring Steve Kulmar into the debate. He's a retail consultant. Over the past 20 years, he's worked with some of the country's biggest names, including Woolworths and Westfield. Steve, welcome to the drum. Now, when Coles says it won't hurt suppliers, do we know that they're telling the truth?
I think they are. I think they are. I mean, Coles are a very large, well-organised company. They have spent a lot of time thinking and planning their fresh food offensive, and they're very well organised. So I'm sure that there won't, in the short to medium term, be increased pressure on supply. In the longer term, they may well be. But I'm not actually sure if I agree with your point, because unlike staple foods, the two supermarket chains do not hold anything like the share of business that they hold in the staple food category. Fresh food is a much smaller share of their total sales, and indeed they have a smaller share of the total fresh food market. So what Coles are doing is both taking advantage of the fact that Woolworths and Coles have a smaller share of that category, so they're going after that category, and secondly, they're also going after Woolworths, because Woolworths are known as the fresh food people. They would like to change that position, but there's nothing like the dominance between those two in fresh food as it is in staple food.
So how will this actually work? Are they trying to use this as a short-term tactic to get people in their supermarkets and get them buying other products, and cross-subsidising those products within the
Fresh is
supermarket?
increasingly more and more important to the supermarket chains because it brings business on a daily basis. Unlike staple foods where you go and do your staple food shop on a fortnightly basis. But if you have a really strong fresh food offer, you have a reason to visit the supermarket on a more frequent basis. So it encourages fresh is really important because it brings traffic.
So if this becomes a long-term tactic, does that then become hard to preserve the prices that farmers get, the growers get for selling their fruit and veg to the big supermarkets?
Not necessarily, because what both Coles would be doing here is looking and saying to themselves, we can increase our market share. And what they'll be doing is going after share. They'll be using price because they're not first to market. I mean, they're late to market in owning fresh. I mean, we would argue that from a consumer perspective, Woolies already own that position. But in real terms, we know that the bulk of fresh is still consumed through independents and purchased through independents.
Okay, so will it flow on to those independents? Will they
it'll have an impact? It should, if Coles are successful with delivering real fresh, real variety, and that's questionable, then they would, over time, have an impact on the smaller chains and indeed on the independents.
So if it has an impact on the smaller chains, how does it not then have an impact on the growers?
Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't have an impact on the growers because both Coles and Woolworths are incredibly efficient organisations, a lot more efficient than the independents in securing produce and putting it onto the shelves.
I don't really care in a free market. I would be happy to see the price set itself, but the fact is, at the moment, the market dominance that those two players have. We live in a country where we only tolerate two airlines, two brands of chocolate, two supermarkets, two liquor stores, and the fact is that's not a free market. And while ordinarily I don't have much sympathy for people crying foul, in the supply chain, the farmers are in a position now where particularly we've seen it happen with wine growers, but now fresh food, similar to dairy and other things in the past, they are under increasing pressure to discount or get left behind. And that would be fine if they genuinely had multiple suppliers to deal with and multiple supply chains to deal with, but they don't because of the undue market dominance that two players have.
Well, that is true across most of those categories. In the case of fresh, we do have a broader competitive set. In that we have a lot of business still done through small greengrocer. We have a lot of business done through some family-owned chains. We also have a lot of business done through businesses like Metcash. So in that case, the actual share of market is small.
I don't think we should necessarily assume that just because there's only two players in a market, it is necessarily acts in a monopolistic way either. Sometimes some markets only have two major players. There's a lot of reasons for that. There are economies of scale. It's just much more efficient to do so. And you can have a perfectly competitive market and one that brings great deals for consumers with only two players. I don't think definitionally there's anything wrong, but it isn't just two players. There's actually a large number of smaller players as well, which provide both actual competition and potential competition if the dominant players fail to provide consumers.
Sure, but I know how much you love a Productivity Commission report. And there certainly are recommendations that have said that our planning laws restrict the location of supermarket entrants so that we entrench market dominance by those two. And those sorts of things need to be cleaned up before you can form a sensible view about who's getting ripped off or not.
John?
Given that there are lots of other retailers that like a big supermarket to be in their Westfield or their shopping centre, and for a long time that was to everybody's benefit, and oftentimes if you had a big Coles or Woolworths, you also had a very big fruit and veggie shop downstairs. Is there any evidence to suggest that as the big two supermarket chains are expanding fruit and veggies, expanding butchers as well, liquor shops as well, that those retailers that are being duplicated are being forced out? Because this is obviously the fear that they'll be forced out, then prices will go back up.
I don't think there's any proof yet to suggest that. And in actual fact, where we do have both of the supermarkets quite active in a market, in a shopping centre, we often find a really strong fresh offering in there as well. Mm-hmm. And that's not uncommon.
Just finally, Steve, some of the competitors to Coles are suggesting this could be a little bit of a marketing con, that fruit and veg is already going down anyway because of an oversupply. Is there some truth there?
Well, there's absolutely truth there. You've only got to read the half-yearly report today from Woolworths. I mean, they talked a lot to the deflationary impact of fresh food in their second quarter result. So yes, unlike a year ago where we were seeing deflation in food because of floods and whatever. We're actually seeing deflation at the moment in fresh food.
Steve, thanks a lot for coming on The Drum.
Thank you.